I never thought using Tinder would turn into a nightmare. It all started when I downloaded the app, hoping to find a date. Little did I know that my experience would become a disturbing and scary horror story. One evening, as I was swiping through profiles, I came across a photo that caught my eye. It was a picture of a girl named Mona. She had a sweet smile and seemed friendly, so I swiped right. To my surprise, we matched instantly and I received a message from her. "Hey there," her message read. "I'm Mona. Nice to meet you." We started chatting, and Mona seemed like a normal person at first. We talked about our interests and shared funny stories. But as the days passed, things took a dark turn. Mona began asking personal and invasive questions. She wanted to know where I lived, where I worked, and even my daily routine. It made me uncomfortable, but I didn't want to be rude, so I answered some of her questions vaguely. Then one night I received a message from her that sent shivers down my spine. "I know where you live," it said. I was terrified. How could she possibly know where I lived? I asked her how she found out, but she didn't respond. Instead, she sent me a picture of my own house. It was taken from outside, and the message read, "I'm closer than you think." I panicked and immediately blocked Mona on Tinder. I thought that would be the end of it, but I was wrong. The next morning, I received a text message from an unknown number. It said, "You can't escape me." I felt trapped and fear consumed me. I didn't know what to do, so I decided to involve the police. I showed them the messages and the picture of my house. They promised to investigate, but told me there wasn't much they could do at that point. As time went by and the harassment continued, I received more texts and even disturbing voicemails. Mona seemed to know everything about me, and it was as if she was always watching. I couldn't sleep, and I was constantly on edge. One night, I woke up to a strange noise coming from my backyard. I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously went outside to investigate. What I saw sent chills down my spine. Mona was standing there, staring at me with a sinister grin. I screamed and ran back inside, locking all the doors and windows. I called the police again and they rushed to my house. But when they arrived, Mona was nowhere to be found. The officers searched the area but couldn't find any trace of her. They told me to stay vigilant and keep my doors locked. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Mona was still lurking nearby. As days passed, I became a prisoner in my own home. I installed security cameras and changed my phone number, but Mona's presence continued to haunt me. I couldn't go out without feeling like I was being watched, and I was constantly on edge. One evening, as I was sitting in my living room, the lights suddenly went out. I heard footsteps approaching, and then I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck. I turned around and saw Mona standing there, her eyes filled with malice. She lunged at me and we struggled. I managed to push her away and ran to the front door, but it was locked from the outside. I was trapped. Mona advanced toward me, her intentions clear. Just when I thought it was over, a neighbor heard the commotion and called the police. They arrived just in time to apprehend Mona and rescue me from her clutches. It turned out that Mona had been stalking me for weeks, gathering information about my life and planning to harm me. She had a history of mental health issues and had become fixated on me after our brief conversation on Tinder. I learned the importance of being cautious when sharing personal information online, and how quickly a seemingly harmless interaction can turn into a terrifying ordeal. My experience with Tinder had become a nightmare, but thanks to the police, I was able to escape from the clutches of the person who had haunted my life. In the end, I deleted the app and vowed never to use it again. My life had been forever changed by the disturbing and scary horror story that unfolded through the simple act of swiping right. I want to tell you about the worst Tinder date of my life. It all began when I swiped right on a profile that seemed pretty normal. Her name was Sabine, and her pictures showed a friendly-looking girl with a bright smile. We started chatting and she seemed nice enough. We had a lot in common and our conversations flowed easily. It didn't take long before we decided to meet up at a local coffee shop. The day arrived and I was feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. I got there early and I noticed Sabine was already waiting for me. She looked just like her pictures, and we greeted each other with smiles. The conversation started off well, with us talking about our interests and hobbies. But as the conversation continued, something started feeling off. She began asking me personal questions like where I lived and whether I lived alone. It was strange, but I brushed it off as nerves. Maybe she was just trying to get to know me better. We decided to go for a walk in a nearby park after finishing our coffee. The sun was setting and the park was slowly getting darker. Sabine's behavior became even more unsettling. She kept making strange comments about how beautiful the night was and how the darkness had a certain charm to it. As we walked deeper into the park, I noticed that there were fewer people around. The uneasy feeling in my gut grew stronger, but I didn't want to seem paranoid, so I tried to keep the conversation light. That's when Sabine suggested we go off the path and into the woods. My heart started racing and I hesitated, but she insisted, saying she knew a great spot with a beautiful view. Against my better judgment, I followed her. We walked for what felt like an eternity, deeper into the woods, with only the faint moonlight guiding our way. The air grew colder, and my fear began to overwhelm me. I asked her if we could turn back, but she just smiled and said, "We're almost there." Finally, we reached a small clearing. It was so dark that I could hardly see anything. Sabine led me to the center and told me to wait. She walked away, and that's when I heard something rustling in the bushes. I strained my eyes to see, and I could barely make out the figures of people lurking in the shadows. Panic surged through me, and I turned to run, but I tripped and fell to the ground. Before I knew it, those shadowy figures were upon me, and they dragged me deeper into the woods. I was terrified, unable to scream as they tied me to a tree. The figures moved closer, and I could finally see their faces. They were wearing masks, distorted and horrifying. One of them whispered something about a ritual, while another held a knife. I knew I had to escape. With all the strength I could muster, I managed to free one of my hands. Just as the masked figures prepared to do whatever twisted thing they had in mind, I lunged at the nearest one, knocking them off balance. I scrambled to my feet and ran as fast as I could. The chase was relentless. I could hear their footsteps behind me, their whispers of anger and frustration. I didn't stop until I reached the edge of the woods and saw the lights of a nearby house. I banged on the door, praying for someone to answer. A kind stranger let me in, and I called the police. They arrived quickly, but by the time they reached the woods, the masked figures were gone. They searched the area, but found no trace of Sabine or the others. The police took my statement and promised to investigate, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something truly horrifying. I deleted my Tinder account that night and vowed to be more cautious about who I met online. I never thought I'd find myself in such a creepy situation, all because of a dating app called Tinder. It all started innocently enough, just like any other day. I decided to give Tinder a try, hoping to meet someone interesting. Little did I know this was a decision I'd soon regret. I swiped right on a profile that caught my eye. Her name was Mia, and she seemed friendly and down to earth in her pictures. We matched instantly, and we started chatting. She told me she lived nearby and suggested we meet up that evening. Excited and a little nervous, I agreed. We decided to meet at a local coffee shop. As I waited there sipping my latte, I noticed someone standing by the window. It was Mia. She looked exactly like her photos, which was a relief. We greeted each other and our conversation flowed easily. She had a warm smile and a friendly look that put me at ease. After a while, she suggested we go for a walk in the nearby park. As we strolled through the park, the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the trees. Mia and I talked about our lives, our interests, and our hopes for the future. It felt like we had known each other for ages. But as darkness fell, something strange happened. Mia's behavior began to change. Her smile faded and her eyes took on an unsettling intensity. She started asking bizarre questions about my deepest fears and darkest secrets. I tried to laugh it off, thinking she was just trying to be playful. But then she said something that sent shivers down my spine. She whispered, "I know what you're afraid of. I know everything about you." I was starting to feel really uncomfortable, and I suggested that maybe it was time for me to head home. But Mia insisted that we stay a bit longer, saying she had something important to show me. Against my better judgment, I agreed. She led me deeper into the park, away from the well-lit paths. The darkness seemed to swallow us as we walked deeper into the woods. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized I had no idea where we were going. Finally, we reached a clearing, and that's when I saw it. A circle of candles on the ground, surrounded by strange symbols. It looked like something out of a horror movie. My heart raced as I realized that I was in way over my head. Mia's voice took on an eerie tone as she began to chant in a language I couldn't understand. I tried to run, but my feet felt like they were glued to the ground. I was paralyzed with fear. As Mia continued her chant, a cold wind swept through the clearing, extinguishing the candles one by one. With each extinguished candle, I felt a wave of dread wash over me. It was as if something evil was lurking in the darkness, waiting to pounce. I mustered all the courage I had left and shouted at Mia to stop. She turned to me, her eyes now glowing with an unnatural light. She smiled, but it was a smile devoid of warmth or humanity. "Too late," she whispered, and with that, the last candle went out, plunging us into complete darkness. I felt something touch my shoulder, and I let out a scream. The next thing I knew, I was back at the coffee shop, sitting alone at my table. It was as if the entire night had been a nightmare. I quickly checked my phone, and to my horror I saw that there were no messages from Mia, no record of our conversation, and no trace of her on Tinder. It was as if she had never existed. I rushed home, my mind racing with fear and confusion. I tried to forget about that night, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something malevolent had entered my life through Tinder. To this day, I have no idea what really happened that night in the park. I deleted the Tinder app from my phone, and I've sworn off online dating for good. I was home alone one night, feeling a bit lonely, so I decided to try out this dating app called Tinder. It's an app where you can meet new people and maybe find a date. I thought it might be fun to connect with someone new, so I created an account and started swiping through profiles. As I swiped left and right, I came across a profile that caught my eye. The picture was of a friendly-looking person named Patricia. She had a warm smile and seemed really nice, so I swiped right to match with her. Almost instantly, I got a message from her. "Hey there, nice to meet you," Patricia wrote. We started chatting, and she seemed like a genuinely cool person. We had a lot in common, and our conversation flowed easily. She told me she lived nearby, which was a big plus. We decided to meet up for coffee the next day. The next morning, I felt excited and a little nervous about our date. I got dressed and headed to the cafe we had agreed upon. When I arrived, I looked around but didn't see Patricia anywhere. I sent her a message asking if she was running late. After a few minutes, I received a reply that sent shivers down my spine. It was a photo of me, taken from behind, as I stood at the cafe's entrance. The message read, "I'm closer than you think." I turned around, but there was no one behind me. I felt a chill in my spine and realized that something was off. I decided to leave the cafe and head back home. When I got home, I received another message from Patricia. She said, "Sorry about that. I just wanted to surprise you. Let's reschedule our date for tonight." Despite my unease, I agreed to meet her later that evening. But as the day went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. That night, I met Patricia at a park near my house. She seemed normal at first, but as we walked along the dimly lit paths, I noticed something strange. There were no other people around, and it felt like we were completely isolated. Patricia suddenly stopped and turned to me with an evil grin. "I have a game I want to play," she said. "What kind of game?" I asked, my heart pounding. She handed me a small box and said, "Open it." Inside the box, I found a bunch of small, sharp needles. My stomach churned as I realized what she wanted me to do. She told me to start pricking my fingers with the needles and said it was a test of our connection. I was terrified, but I didn't want to anger her, so I reluctantly started pricking my fingers. With each painful prick, Patricia's smile grew wider, and I couldn't help but feel like I was in danger. After what felt like an eternity, she finally told me to stop. Blood dripped from my fingers, and I felt weak and dizzy. Patricia reached out and licked the blood from one of my fingers, her eyes filled with a strange hunger. I knew I had to get away from her. I mumbled an excuse about needing to use the restroom and slowly backed away. As soon as I was out of her sight, I ran as fast as I could, not looking back. I made it home safely, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over me. I blocked Patricia on Tinder and hoped to never hear from her again. But the nightmare wasn't over. The next day, I received a message from an unknown number. It was a photo of me taken while I was at home, along with the message, "I'll always find you." I was terrified and didn't know what to do. I called the police and explained everything that had happened. They took my statement and told me they would investigate. For weeks, I lived in fear, constantly looking over my shoulder. I received more messages from the unknown number, each one more threatening than the last. I couldn't sleep, and my life had turned into a never-ending nightmare. One night, as I was lying in bed, I heard a noise outside my window. I mustered the courage to look out and saw a figure standing in the darkness. It was Patricia, and she was holding a knife. I called the police again, and this time they arrived quickly. They arrested Patricia and assured me that she would never bother me again. As I watched them take her away, I couldn't help but feel relieved that it was finally over. Tinder had brought me more than just a date. It had brought me a terrifying ordeal I would never forget. I'm going to tell you about a terrifying experience I had with the dating app Tinder. It was just a regular evening and I was bored, so I decided to check my Tinder profile. I swiped left and right, like we all do. Then I came across a profile that caught my eye. Her name was Rosa, and she had a cute smile in her picture. We matched instantly, and I sent her a message saying, "Hey, how's it going?" To my surprise, she replied almost immediately. We started chatting, and Rosa seemed nice and friendly. We had a lot in common, and our conversation was going well. We exchanged numbers and decided to meet up for coffee the next day. The next morning, I was excited and nervous at the same time. I got dressed and headed to the coffee shop. When I arrived, I saw her sitting at a corner table just like in her picture. She looked even prettier in person. We started talking and the conversation flowed smoothly. I was starting to feel really comfortable around her. But then she asked me a strange question. "Have you ever had your heart broken before?" I didn't expect such a deep question on a first date, but I answered honestly, "Yeah, I have. It was tough, but I moved on." Rosa smiled and said, "Good. It's important to have a strong heart." I didn't think much of it at the time, but looking back, that was a weird thing to say. The date continued, and we had a nice time. We decided to see each other again, and that's when things started to get disturbing. Over the next few weeks, Rosa and I went on more dates. She seemed perfect, but I noticed something odd. She always asked strange questions about my emotions and feelings. Questions like, "What's the most painful thing you've ever felt?" Or, "Have you ever been truly terrified?" I started to feel uncomfortable around her, but I couldn't put my finger on why. It was like she was trying to dig deep into my soul, and it was starting to freak me out. Still, I gave her the benefit of the doubt. One evening, we were at my apartment watching a movie. Out of nowhere, Rosa said, "I want to show you something." She took out a small box from her bag and handed it to me. Inside was a strange black stone. I asked her, "What's this?" She replied, "It's a heart stone. It can protect your heart from ever being broken again." I didn't know what to make of it, but I took the stone and thanked her. That night, I had a terrible nightmare. I dreamt of Rosa standing over me, holding a knife and saying, "I'll protect your heart forever." I woke up in a cold sweat, and the heartstone was on my bedside table. I didn't remember putting it there, but I was too shaken to think about it. I decided to confront Rosa about her strange behavior the next day. When I met her for lunch, I asked, "Why have you been asking me all these weird questions? And what's the deal with that heartstone?" She looked at me with a cold expression and said, "I need to make sure your heart is strong enough for what comes next." I was horrified and demanded to know what she meant. She didn't answer and simply got up and walked away. I tried to follow her, but she disappeared into the crowd. That night, I couldn't sleep. I felt like I was being watched, and I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. I decided to do some research on Rosa, and what I found sent chills down my spine. There were news articles about a woman named Rosa who had been involved in a series of disappearances and unsolved murders. She had lured her victims in with her charm, and then I couldn't bring myself to read the rest. I realized I needed to get away from her, but she had disappeared completely. I was scared for my life and didn't know who to turn to. I called the police and told them everything I knew. They launched an investigation, but Rosa was nowhere to be found. They told me to be cautious and keep my doors locked. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still out there, watching and waiting. Months passed, and I tried to move on with my life. I deleted Tinder and changed my phone number, hoping to leave it all behind. But one night, as I was lying in bed, I heard a soft, eerie whisper in the darkness. It was her voice saying, "I'll protect your heart forever." I turned on the lights, but there was no one there. I knew I couldn't escape her, and the terror of that night still haunts me to this day.